Hello children, this is lesson number 12 and we have already started a new chapter called ratio analysis. Very important chapter for practical exam, project as well as main exam. Now I've started with current ratio. So some pointers for current ratio. If provision for doubtful debt is given, it is to be subtracted from trade receivable, that is subtracted from current assets, trade receivable. This point you need to remember. Second point. Now, there are certain transaction given where you may get confused. Will it affect the current ratio or not, liquid ratio or not? So, payment of dividend involves two things. One is payment is in cash and the dividend is dividend payable. Dividend payable is a current liability and cash is a current asset. So, payment of dividend will affect your current ratio as well as liquid ratio. So keep this in mind. Second point. Third one. Sometimes in the question it is given vendors of fixed assets were paid by issuing equity shares, right? That means you bought fixed asset but the vendor was not paid in cash. Instead, he was issued the equity shares of the company. Now, two things will be involved. One is the vendor of fixed asset. Fixed asset is neither current nor liquid. Okay, so it will not affect our current ratio or liquid ratio. And share capital, all of you know, even this is long term. So this transaction, both of them are long term, so they will not affect the current ratio as well as liquid ratio. Once again, remember point number 1, provision for doubtful debt to be subtracted from trade receivable if it is given. Payment of dividend, how will it affect the current ratio or liquid ratio is? Yes, cash will reduce and the current liability, that is dividend payable, will reduce. Now, vendors of fixed asset, if they are paid by issuing of equity shares, there will be no effect on our current ratio or liquid ratio. If they are paid in cash, then it will be definitely affecting our current asset. Now, this I have very specially prepared for all of you. This will solve a lot of your problems in ratio analysis. It will be used again and again. So that is why I want you to see how the various things will be visible in the balance sheet. Now let us begin with asset side. All of you know there are only two kinds of asset, fixed asset and current asset. Now what all will include in fixed asset? Tangible assets like plant and machinery, land and building, furniture and fittings. Intangible assets like goodwill, patents, copyright. Non-current investment, if the company has invested for a long term, it is called non-current investment. And the last one is long-term loans and advances. If the company has forwarded some amount of loan or advance to someone for a long term, all that will be included in fixed asset. And the other type of asset, any asset which is not fixed asset, is current asset. And total of fixed and current asset will be total asset. Now moving on to the liability side, we are doing company. So instead of capital, we will have shareholders funds, which is popularly called equity. You've done in your 11th standard. Shareholders funds or equity is one and the same thing. Then comes long-term debt. If you are borrowing for long-term or if you're making long-term provision. Provisions I will take a special class. So right now long-term debt will mean long-term borrowing and long-term provisions. After that there is only one thing left, that is current liability. Both long-term debt and current liability together are called total debt. That is, either you are borrowing for long term or you are borrowing or having any liability for short term. Both of them together will be called total debt. This is very important for solving various questions. It will come very handy. So out of these items in the balance sheet, sometimes some of them are given and rest you have to calculate. Whenever you have to calculate the missing figure, you are experts of calculating missing figure. So you can prepare a rough balance sheet in your working notes and calculate the missing figure. You may not prepare the balance sheet. You can just use the formula and find out. I'll give you an example. Suppose total assets are given and fixed assets are given. So how will you calculate current asset? Total asset minus fixed asset will be current asset. Easy. Suppose your equity is given and total debt is given. How will you calculate the current liability? You know the total assets. Same amount is equal on both the sides. So you may take up the amount, deduct shareholders funds, deduct long-term debt, and you will get current liability. You may seem confused, but once you start solving the question, this balance sheet will be very, very useful. This balance sheet I'll be using again. So please, what you do is you draw it in your register also and practice with this. It will come very, very easy. Now continuing with our ratios, we are doing our second ratio. Current ratio we've done. The second ratio in the chapter is called liquid ratio. It is also called acid test ratio. Very simple ratio. The formula is liquid ratio is equal to liquid asset upon current liability. Now liquid asset is something new for you. I'll tell you how to calculate. First the formula, liquid ratio is equal to liquid asset upon current liability. Current liability is our old friend, so there's no problem at all. What are liquid asset? Liquid asset is equal to current assets minus inventories minus prepaid expense. Liquid asset can be calculated by deducting inventories and prepaid expense from current asset. So that will be your formula number 2, and the ideal ratio, liquid ratio or acid test ratio is 1:1. They have to be equal. If it is equal, it's a good ratio. So that is our ratio number 2. Please start solving question and start asking me an n number of questions. I'm open for all the queries and problems. One last point for the day is what happens when debentures are repaid. Debenture, students, you've done in your 11th standard. Debenture is a kind of loan that a company takes from general public, and debentures are long term. But when they are repaid in the year of repayment, their life becomes short term. That means they'll be repaid in this year, 1 year. So when the debentures are repaid in that year, very, very important, debentures become current liability. So in this, two things are involved, cash and debentures. Cash is a current asset and debentures are current liability. So this will affect your current ratio. You have to calculate and tell whether it will improve or decline or whatever. So once again, the year in which debentures are repaid, in that year debentures are considered current liability. So one set of ratios I have done with you, that is short term solvency or liquidity ratios. There are two ratios in that, current ratio and liquid ratio. So start solving questions and I'm sure there won't be much trouble. Bye bye.